welcome to the podcast. I'm Jeff Suckendorf, CEO of UTD Scubadiving, and I'm here as always with our training director, Ben Boss. Hey, Ben.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
And a very special guest, Gareth Lock, today of The Human Diver. So, hey, Gareth.
Hi, Jeff. How you doing? Hi, Ben. Good to see you.
You too.
So this should be a really interesting talk. So we're going to let Gareth introduce himself. But the talk today is really about human factors in diving and the fact that divers are people and have their own proper set of successes and failures in pretty much everything they do. So to me, this is a really interesting talk about how to integrate, the idea of that we are humans, that we do program in occasionally mistakes into our life, and those mistakes have consequences, and the idea is to then switch that programming, of course, so we don't make the big mistakes, or we catch them while as we say, while they're still incidents before they snowball down. So let's go right ahead, and I want to kind of do this backward, Gareth. So before we introduce you, can you introduce your company first?
Yeah, sure.
And then,
so
we'll get a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So the company is called the Human Diver, and it was set up, I suppose, 2016 really, which was shortly after I left the Royal Air Force, and I wanted to bring my experiences from military aviation and safety and systems thinking and apply it to the diving industry. And that came about because I realized there was a huge gap in knowledge within the diving sector of how to, in effect, improve safety. And that unfortunately doesn't sell very well. So it's about improving diving performance and having better time, making more of the instruction we do and the dives we do, so that we don't have those near misses, or we don't have those safe, scary moments, or we don't have those fatalities that are just a product, I would say, of human performance variability. We always have those little things that don't go quite to plan. And the idea was to put together a series of programs which started off as face-to-face classrooms, training sessions using computer-based simulation to create a stressful environment, but you could learn from that. And then moving into online learning and webinar-based training. And then in March last year, writing a book which basically codified the stuff that I was teaching and brought it to life through a number of stories, as Ben's got, Under Pressure, Diving Deeper with Human Factors. And that sold, I've lost count now, but it's in the order of 3,500 copies or more since March last year. And then that, Human Diver was then behind the documentary which I published and produced and was released in May this year, called If Only, which looked at a diving fatality through the lens of human factors and just culture, so that we could learn. And the ultimate goal, which is not a very good business goal, is actually the human diver stops working, and actually the materials become part and parcel of the training agency's materials. And that might be a bit of an odd thing, but actually the goal is that it's out there, and it's not treated as a separate activity. It is part of any diver training programs like buoyancy and propulsion and rebreather diving and all of those things, because whenever we go diving, it's the same things that are out there, no matter what sort of diving you do and what sort of at-risk activities you do. So it's a huge passion, as you'll probably realize over the next hour or so.
I love the phrase, it's a human performance variability. Is that what you call it?
Definitely.
Which is, to me, is a euphemism for humans get to screw up, and the idea is we try to prevent it.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, and it's trying to shift the attitudes to say, it's diver error, or it's human error. And actually, we only know that an error has occurred after the event. And what is quite amazing from the sort of the modern safety research is that more goes right than wrong. What we do notice are the little blips that sit outside what we would consider safe performance. And when things go wrong, people go, look, they broke the rules. They didn't do something right. And you say, okay, but what does normal look like? Accidents happen as deviations from normal, not just deviations from rules. Now, normal might be following the rules, but most of the time normal isn't. So what we have is, when I set up performance variability, we have an amount of capacity, and that could be mental capacity, it could be team capacity, it could be the environment we're in, it could be the equipment we're using, and we are managing that capacity to the best of our experience, and we're making the best decisions we can using that experience. And when we capacity to manage all of that variability, accidents happen. And what training does and what effective equipment design does is it builds greater capacity into the system so that we can do bigger, longer, deeper, more complicated dives, because we have got a bigger margin between what our performance is and what the margin for error is. So there we go.
No, but it's interesting because we have, we'll get on to the next thing in a minute, but we have, because I think we're going to come back to this. We've always said that an accident is caused by a series of incidents. And, if you can prevent the incidents, you prevent the accident. And I think that, a lot of it to me is, is brain bandwidth, right? Do you have the brain bandwidth to stop something after it's a huge issue? Or do you have to stop it? You have to stop the trickle of these three small things that lead up to the one big thing. And of course, in flying, that's the big thing we always did, right? So you wanted to get a student rattled in an airplane, you drop their pencil, right? Boom.
Yeah.
And then that starts a whole thing of, while they're picking up the pencil, you turn off a switch, they lose a light, they lose this, that, the other thing. And you simulate this whole snowball, which is really interesting to me, that it then turns into something catastrophic. So, all right, so we're gonna
on that. So I was going to say, just on that is, there's a guy a colleague of mine in the States who's got a fantastic quote about safety is not the absence of accidents or incidents. It is the presence of barriers and defenses and the capacity of the system to fail safely. So to use your point there, you drop the pencil. Now, that means that I've still got to have a mental picture about what's going on, and I can pick it up so that when I look back up again, I've noticed if anything has changed. And that is the barriers and defenses are about the training, the overtraining, designing the equipment to be safe, but recognizing that we're never going to get to zero in terms of error. And therefore, how do we as an individual, or as we're used to team diving, how do the team manage that situation so that if I'm really busy doing something, the other members of the team are providing the capacity to look around and say, right, let's stabilize in the water column, or if we're in a cave with flow, we're providing that stable platform so that we can reference back to where we are. And that is the overtraining that provides you with that capacity and the mental overhead to say, I know what's going on around me.
Yeah, you kind of share the task load, right? I mean, in proper team activities, I was going to say, it doesn't really have to be diving per se, but
Totally.
we always joke that the diver can make a mistake, but the team can't make a mistake. So if the diver makes a mistake and gets task loaded by fixing that mistake, the rest of the team fills in the gap where he loses his awareness on the situation, and then it's much easier to come back into a state of calmness and a state of situational awareness where everyone is back on track again. Yeah.
And we're talking about these, it sounds like we're talking about big dives, right? Tech dives, cave dives and things, but the place we see this happening all the time is with photography. When so underwater, you have 2 people, 3 people, one's got a camera. that whole world becomes the camera. And, you know, there could be, you know, a nuclear explosion and that camera is just everything. This is why we don't allow our cave one divers to do any kind of goal-oriented diving like photography or video or something like that. Let's just talk a little bit about your background because it's interesting. So can you do like a 2-minute bio for us and how you came to this?
Yeah, 2 minutes. So I left school at 18. I joined the
maximum 2 minutes.
In 1889. Yeah, 2 minutes. Joined the RAF in 1989. Spent 25 years in, 10 years flying on Hercules transport aircraft as a navigator, as a flight instructor, as a flight commander, operating low-level night vision goggle flying or halo, high-altitude parachuting as well. Then I left there and did a master's degree in aerospace systems with basically a crash course in anything to do with systems thinking and aerospace. I then went into flight trials and research and development. And then the last 5 years was as a requirements manager and a systems engineer, stopping helicopters and large transport aircraft getting shot down in hostile areas. So having a huge systems view of how things operate, that you can change a component within a system and that might be a black box. But if you don't sort out the equipment, the people, the policies, the procedures, the tactics, you don't have a capability. And I think that's what shaped my view of how do we make diving safer, because it was all about the person. And realistically, you need to take the systems view of the person, the training agency, the environment, the equipment, the team, and all of those things. And in 2011, I started a part-time self-funded PhD, which was trying to look at the role of human factors in diving incidents and accidents. And that got put on hold because it wasn't going anywhere. The industry wasn't particularly interested in what I was doing because most things are failures at the systemic level, the system level. And it was about the same sort of time that I was teaching, and I was getting bigger results through teaching and creating a movement through the academic process.
So what piqued your interest in moving all of the systems experience and all that into scuba? Why didn't you just stay in aviation? There's a plenty of room for this in aviation.
Oh, there is, and that's part of it. I think is that it's really well established there, and I think where the trigger point for me was when I was going through the master's degree, which is where my introduction. Although as a multi-crew aircraft, we would deal with this crew resource management or non-technical skills, and sometimes people call it human factors, but human factors is much bigger than that. When I was going through the master's degree, I went to South Africa on a trip, went to Gansby, and I got my PADI open water ticket, and nobody checked my card, and we went swimming, and it was like, God, this is a bit odd. You know, nobody's really checked on what I'm doing. It's a bit of an odd environment. And then a month later, I went to San Diego, and on the Saturday, I did 3 dives where I had a guide with me, limited to 18 meters, and I had a great time. And on the Sunday, there were no open water level dives available, but there was a couple of 30-meter dives onto Wreck Alley, Yukon, and I can't remember what the other wreck is that's part of that area.
About 8 miles from my house.
Oh, right, okay. Excellent. So building the sort of the waiver form, presented my card, and the guy went, well, it's a 100-foot dive. You're only open water. You're not allowed on this. Oh, come on. It can't be that bad. And here's another waiver form to sign that says you take total responsibility of this. And it's like, yeah, okay. So I jumped in, and my equipment didn't work properly. It was all rental gear. And I got back from that dive and went, you know what? That was really lucky. And it was also pretty stupid to do what I did. And I went back into sort of diving back in, and I met a whole bunch of GUE divers and went, this is how I want to dive. And as I started to go through fundamentals and Tech 1 and Tech 2, I was thinking, hang on a minute, there is a level of diving here that's I'm learning, and I'm getting the mindset that I was getting from aviation. And I was thinking, hang on a minute, why don't we have all of the other stuff that keeps aviation safe into the diving environment, like incident analysis, in terms of crew resource management and decision making and teamwork and leadership and communications. All of these things that allow you to create a shared mental model within the team, which is really what crew resource management is about, so that you can undertake proper team diving, and you're able to, and I don't like the word rely on the team members, but you are mutually accountable to the performance of the team. As said, if you're busy doing something, there are other people keeping an eye on you, and when they're busy, you're keeping an eye on them. So there is that shared view of what is happening. But it didn't go down too well when I first started.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before we started recording, right? That you didn't get the best response from the world of agencies. And, you know, we have a policy. We only say what we do well. We never say anything bad about anybody else. But
totally, no, that's fine. I'm more than happy with that.
But you know, you haven't been able to crack that agency thing yet, right?
No, and you know, I've approached a number of the agencies about trying to build this material into their training programs, and I get that it's difficult because the agencies are predominantly, they're commercial entities, and outside of the diving world, safety is not seen as something that makes money, because what you're trying to do is prevent a bad thing from happening, and trying to sell stuff that prevents bad things doesn't happen. What you want to do is sell stuff that gives enjoyment. Is about is having a great time and talking about accidents, incidents. It's not a particularly great sales pitch. You know, somebody comes into your dive shop and you say, hey, look, you know, what you want to do is this little bit of extra training here because you do know that you could die when you go diving. And the client walks in and goes, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go and find something else. You know, it's not particularly good for business to talk about the negative aspects of that. So I totally understand the difficulty, and I struggle with marketing this, you know, the sort of training and the mindset out, because people go, well, I haven't had an accident, therefore I must be doing something okay. And just because you've not had an accident, it doesn't mean that you were safe in what you were doing. It could be that you were incredibly lucky. And if and if you don't reflect on that,
well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think a lot of people, especially in diving, they confuse experience with routine, and they think, just like you said, they're just because they've done the same dive 100 times at the same dive site every weekend with the same divers, probably nothing happened, and now all of a sudden in other dives they get to push a little bit further, or they get, you know, deviation a little bit from the normal procedures. Nothing happened for 100 dives, so why should something happen on the next 100 dives? And this is where this is, I think, one of the reasons why when you hear about certain accidents happening, it's rare to hear that a newly certified diver got themselves into troubles, this and there. It's always these experienced technical diving or experienced instructor, or is someone with, you know, that should have the clearness of mind to foresee these things, yet it always them that, you know, that seem to get into trouble.
One more thing I want to talk about with flying, and then Ben will start. I want to go through a little bit more of the process and what Gareth has developed and so on. But, you know, I'm a lifelong pilot, lifelong flight instructor, and the aviation media, which from generally was magazines, and as it's built on into the website, has been very, very good about publishing and analyzing flight accidents at every level, at like the most basic level, right? Like Flying Magazine has accidents reports in it. Every magazine I know about aviation covers accident reports, and they talk about them openly, and they do analysis, and they look at the NTSB reports and all this other stuff. And they present that to private pilots, new guys with 20, 30, 40 hours, 50 hours, just getting a license. Scuba, like you said, is completely scared to death of this. And I think that it does our community of divers, especially new divers, a huge disservice that the industry doesn't own up to the fact that there are accidents and there's a ton to be learned from them. And we use these accident reports in training all the time for people. It's like you come back from a flight, you had this sort of weird thing happen. You look at, did you see that airplane off your right side? No, I didn't. Okay, let's read this accident report about this midair. So how do you, what's your vision? I mean, you mentioned briefly, you think it's that nobody wants to advertise the bad stuff, but there's a bigger systemic problem here that we're not talking about these things, don't you think?
And I think, sweeping generalization, the majority of the diver training agencies have got their roots in the States. And there is a huge litigation culture that's across there. And you just have to look at the liability waiver forms that the agencies hold, and basically you sign away your right to sue based in terms of incompetence. And when I speak to diving instructors, and it was great in the book, there are 30 plus stories in there, and I would say probably about 20 of them are diving instructors. The ability to tell a story about something that happened as a near miss in an analytical way, and so you can learn from it, is fantastic. But I also know diving instructors say, I won't talk about stuff that's happened in my class because I'm worried that a dodgy lawyer is going to pick that up and say you're incompetent. And you sit there and go, well, actually, you're a human and you make mistakes. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. And aviation, although it's relatively mature now, you go back 50 years ago, aviation was incredibly immature. It was pilot error. You were last to touch it. You stuck it in the ground. And then they realized that, hang on a minute, by looking at cockpit voice recorders and data, they realized that there was that performance variability. They were limited in what they could do. So let's teach pilots about attention. Let's have standard scans. Let's have standard terminology in terms of communication. And let's start looking and separate the observable behaviors and actions from the individual. That we look at a pilot and their limited capability or capacity and skill sets versus John, the pilot, who had those limited capabilities. Who is involved is almost irrelevant when it comes to learning. Where it happens is almost irrelevant. When it happens is almost relevant, unless it's sort of related to currents and visibility and things like that. But most of the time, what we're talking about is individuals and their own limitations, how they operate together as a team or not, as the case may be. And that includes the skipper or the captain of the boat, and all of these things that work together as a system, rather than John Doe was a stupid pilot and he flew his aircraft into the ground. All right, do you think he meant to do that? Well, it was obvious that was going to happen. Well, hang on a minute. If it was that obvious, do you think he would have done it? Oh, no. Okay, so let's draw the parallel to the divers. Do you think they intentionally went out there to end up killing themselves? No. But they were stupid. All right, well, and most of this is about risk perception and understanding your limitations to make decisions based on previous experiences. And that's really what I'm trying to take from aviation and healthcare and oil and gas and try to bring into the diving world. And people recognize, they go, once there's a bit of reticence to try and do limit the training, or they don't want to take the training because they don't see the value. And then when they undertake it, they go, wow, this is what's needed. And the number of people that have written to me about the book and said, this has completely changed my outlook on life and diving. It's a book about human performance with diving stories. But you could take that book, and I've got lots of safety people who've taken that book and applied it to oil and gas and to software teams and to healthcare, because we are all So why wouldn't we behave the same way?
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
And I've
So
read
Ben,
the
let's
book
Actually,
through it.
Ben,
I went off on one there.
no, that's okay. Ben, go ahead. Let's get in the weeds a little bit, right? And start working through
Mhm.
some of the stuff that's
That's
in the
I
book.
mean, I think that's a good point, and we sometimes talk about it in scuba diving courses also, that yeah, you learn from your mistakes. And I kind of think it's more subtle than that. I don't think you necessarily learn from your mistakes. You can only learn from your mistakes if you get to redo the exact same scenario and now doing differently, so you don't make that mistake, and then you've learned from your mistake. Just by saying by it, that's again.
I would say one of the things we've got to look at is the conditions that led to that mistake that you can classify as a mistake afterwards. You know, there's a big difference between lessons identified and lessons learned. You can look at that and go, I won't do that again. But unless you understand how it made sense for you, that, and it might be that you ran out of gas and you say, well, why did you run out of gas? Well, because I wasn't paying attention. Okay, so you need to pay more attention. Well, you can't pay more attention. What you can understand is where your attention was, and now you can shift it to where you need it to be. So when people go, they lost situation awareness, I'd ask the question, where was it pointing? Not you lost it, because it's there. It's just in the wrong place.
It's just reallocated. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's distributed in the wrong way. Very good. When reading through your book, I saw a very nice section about checklists, and a very good approach to checklists, because I always thought about checklists as a shopping list for a meal. Now, let's say you're preparing a meal, and I'm going to join you as a guest. And on the way there, you call me up and say, "Hey, can I text you a shopping list for the meal I'm preparing?" Sure. And you send me a message with all these ingredients. I have no idea what you're preparing. I can just see your ingredients. Now I go to the shop and I buy these ingredients. And then if you had forgotten to put one single item on that ingredient list that's crucial to the meal you're cooking, I can never catch your mistake because I have no idea what you're going to cook. So when I come back to your house, I've bought everything that's on that list, but obviously I didn't put in magically that part you forgot. And that's why I think when you look at checklists, they have to be, like you wrote very well in your book, completely pragmatic, and have an understanding, a reasoning behind that. It's not just a little square that you put a little V in and now you've done it. No, the checklist should just be a little sentence that prompts you to do something physically, and then you can move to the next list. And regardless of what kind of checklist it is, there's always this question about discipline, right? I think your view there in the book is a very good and clear way of describing how checklists in scuba diving should be implemented. What made you come to that realization? I guess it came early in your diving career.
Well, it came early because, you know, coming from military aviation, that checklists are there as a mental prompt for an activity that you've been trained for. It is not there as a liability limiting tool that says, if you tick all of these, then you'll be safe. Because if something goes wrong, they pull the checklist out and you go, well, you didn't tick all those boxes, and that's the reason why the accident happened. And I remember being at Rebreather Forum 3, and David Kincaid quote, and he said, you know, of all of the rebreather diving accidents I've investigated, there hasn't been a checklist on those divers. And I challenged him and I said, okay, I get that, but when you watch the aviation accidents, there's a checklist on board the aircraft. So just having a checklist doesn't mean that you're going to be safe. That checklist has to be designed with the minimum amount of friction, resistance to be implemented. So it's a great analogy, Ben, that you talked about the shopping list. And what I do to bring that designing the checklist well is, if I send you that checklist of shopping, and I do it alphabetically, as opposed to the order in which you're going to go around the supermarket, what you will do is most likely either take way longer than I expect you to be, so you're late for dinner and I can't cook the meal, or you'll miss something because you're moving around the aisles and you get to the checkout and you go, oh man, I forgot that. Oh, okay, that's okay. I can, he's probably got that at home. It's okay. And
Have
so
you been talking to my
I think
wife?
that's a great analogy, and then just building on it. So,
Because that's exactly what I do.
Yeah, if I know which supermarket you're going to and I shop there and I know the order in which you're going to go down the aisles, what I can do is say, well, actually, the first thing is the vegetable and the fruit. So I'm going to put that first, and then we're going to go to the next aisle, which is probably the dairy and cheese and bacon and things like that. And I will design the checklist to make it easy to follow based on the, in terms of rebreathers or diving, or, open circuit or rebreather diving, is what is the sequence that needs to be done that matches the environment you're in. So there's no point in doing a build. So, a lot of the checklists we see out there are, you start with a box of bits, especially rebreather diving. You have a box of bits and then you build it all up and then you do your final check and then you go diving. It's like, I don't know anybody who takes a box of bits to a dive site and rebuilds it. And then at the end of the dive, they take it to bits and they put it all away. So you have an interim capability, or an interim configuration where the checklist should start from. Because if we don't start from that known configuration, people will potentially miss stuff beforehand, or they will try and remember where that sequence is and they will make the checklist up themselves.
I was going to say that with regards to the fellow you quoted that said there were never any checklists in the accident he investigated. I'm also very inclined to see that if he did find the checklist, it was most probably filled out completely, because that's where some of the checklists fail. I think then they could just see that box, I don't know, whatever, analyze the gas, for example, and they'll tick that box, and then they'll go over and analyze the gas. On the way there, they get distracted and they analyze one cylinder, not the other. But that's the oxygen tank. That's just fine. And there's been countless of situations where people have taken, especially on a rebreather, an oxygen tank, mounted it on the rebreather, and in fact, it wasn't oxygen, and gotten themselves into trouble. But if they then later review the checklist, but look, he did his check, so something else must have gone wrong.
I think it's important to really understand that in every form of this, and checklists specifically, right? Because I've done a million of them in flying. That it's a thinking thing, right? It's as you said, we look at that, in our model of training, and it's like, checklist. Okay, here's item A. Let me think about item A and how to complete it. Item B. Let me think about item B and how to complete it. Item C. Let me think. So you put your own human interaction into the idea of a checklist. I mean, the simplest flying checklist, right? Your takeoff checklist, your, gas undercarriage mixture props, right? Done them a million times, but still, I sit there in the airplane, it's like gas. Okay, is it on the right tank? Is the pump on? Blah, blah, blah. Undercarriage, is the gear down? Is it locked? Are there lights? Mixture, is it forward and is it working? Prop, blah, blah, blah. It's not just check, because you could kill yourself. So, we start to talk about this in the broader picture of scuba. It's like checklists are great. Thinking's better.
Yeah.
It's a prompt to get you to think. And when we, both of us, we're all coming from a team diving environment, and recognizing that as individuals, we will drift, and it takes a very special individual to be consistent across all the checks all the time. But actually, as a team, we can hold each other accountable for doing those cross checks on each other. So the chances of two of us failing at exactly the same time are limited. And I heard a brilliant statistic the other day about
Exactly.
carpenters. The measure once and cut once, the error rate might be 99.9 or so, 0.1% failure. But if you measure
Measure
twice and cut
twice.
once, it's like really, really, really small number. And you sit there going, okay, so now we've got two people, and have got the mindset that we're going to do checklists, and we're going to check for a response, not check that the activity is done. So a cylinder is on, okay, great. So what? Actually, can I breathe from that cylinder? Or if I inject oxygen, does the PO2 rise? Okay, great. Does it actually deliver oxygen? That's what we're looking for, is the response, not the configuration.
Yeah, I think you're correct there. So you also write a lot about situational awareness, and it's actually a sentence or a wording we use a lot, and we touched about this briefly before, and I think it's nice to see that when it comes to situational awareness, a lot of people, they think it only applies to when you're actually underwater at, on the dive, on the active part of the dive. And I think it starts way before you even get into your suit. And I think there's a part in your book also where you look about how do we discuss a certain way of doing a pre-dive check with people that come from a different background, a different way of training, a different organization, and all that sort of stuff. And it's funny because when I read through that not 2 weeks ago, one of my students posted a picture or a little video on Facebook, and in her team I saw a diver wearing a cylinder clipped off on the right hand side, and her spare alternate air source, which was a normal octopus, was underneath. So if she would have needed gas, it would have been an interesting scenario. And then I wrote her a friendly message. I said, listen, remember to do your proper checks at the surface, regardless of who you're diving with. And then she talked about, but they don't have the training I have. How do they don't know what a modified estrill is or what a flow check is? No, just explain them on the surface. Look, if you need gas, this is my long hose. By the way, how do I get gas from you? Because it's not like you can't dive with anyone else if you don't dive with someone with a long hose, right? It's just securing where you get the gas from. And if then you decide on the dive you're going to do, that's fine. Perfect. Go ahead and dive. But and that kind of opened it up for her, like, oh, of course. Yeah, the purpose of doing a long hose check is to make sure it's free. But that should be regardless of what kind of configuration the alternate air source comes in. And then she'd take that to it. So I think that's good written down in the book as well. The situational
it's
awareness
that ability
part.
to look at, situational awareness is the collecting of information, the collecting of data, making sense of it now based on your previous experiences. And the most important bit is the ability to project into the future and say what could or will happen, or you can't say will because we don't have certainty for the future. What is likely to happen in the future? And is that a good or a bad thing? And how do I mitigate it? So that situational awareness, the example there is, okay, I'm diving with somebody. We have a team or a buddy diving setup. That is my, safety source as well. What happens in the future? Oh, hang on a minute. I need to increase the certainty of what is going to happen in the future. And I think one of the bits that frustrates me in sort of social media is after an event, we know with 100% certainty what happened. When we look forward, we don't know what that is. So when we look at accidents, it's like, oh, that was obvious that was going to happen. Again, we go back to, well, it can't have been that obvious. It might be for you because you know that it's happened, but also you may have the experience to identify that and say, we need to address this and deal with it there and then. So that's going back to Jeff's point of incident analysis and talking about how it made sense for those people to do what they did, so we can look for the conditions, because the event themselves is often very limited value when it comes to learning. Don't run out of gas. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
You know, the Dan research, 47% of fatalities have out of gas as a trigger. Okay, all of the listeners here, don't run out of gas when you go diving. Okay, yeah, okay, thanks very much, Gareth. Well done. But that's what the outcome is. That's what we focus is the outcome, not the conditions, because we're not very mature in the diving industry, and it looks at what happened prior to the
No,
event.
exactly, and I think you're right. I think a lot of divers also place a false sense of security in certain aspects of diving that doesn't deserve that, you know, the respect almost. I mean, a good example there is diving computers. You know, we teach something called ratio deco, and judging by your background, you've probably been introduced to it as well. And initially, a lot of people, they think that, oh, but that's a different way of calculating your decompression, you know, ascent. In a way, it's not really. It's when you do the math, it ends up being almost within certain minutes the same as, you know, a dive computer. But for us, what you touched on before, it gives us an opportunity to look into the future of what might happen, and what effect me staying longer has on both my decompression, but also my gas consumption and my bailout gases in terms of rebreather and stuff like that. And it's funny because as soon as you've taken, you know, that sort of classes, people start realizing, okay, now I see the value. I thought it was just about, if I stay 1 minute at this depth, I need to do so many minutes of deco. And of course, that's the gist of it. But it just gives you such a stronger look behind the scenes of what your computer is about to tell you before you actually make the gas switch and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite nice. We did last weekend. I was with another instructor here. We were doing some diving. We had a guy with us who wasn't trained in UTD, and we were talking about the plan and said, okay, at this depth, for every minute we go further into the cave, we need to do 2 minutes of deco. And he was like, what? He could, at first he couldn't really make the link. It's like, what does the penetration have to do with the decompression? Well, we were at a level which we need to do a ratio of 1 to 2, or sorry, 1 to 1. That means for every minute we go into the cave, or into the mine in this case, we need to go a minute back out, meaning that's 2 minutes. That means 2 minutes added to the deco. And then, wow, that's really, well, yeah, great, you know. But when we did our decompression, we were at the same depth for almost the same times as he was with his computer. And then after the dive, on the drive home, it's like that kind of, you know, it's interesting, because he thought it was just another way of doing maths in your head, and, you know, and but
yes,
to be honest,
but
that's how I got in.
If you ask the guy with the computer, what's the algorithm that set up that decompression strategy for him, then it's like lights out, right? Or at least in ratio deco, we have an idea of what's creating the, you know, what the algorithm is presenting in terms of the math of the profile. And I think that's another part of this. It's like, right, why would you go into decompression unless you're knowing how you're going to get this gas out, how you're going to decompress, right? And if you're following the computer just blindly, you know, there's no human factor there that makes any sense.
Well,
and the stats from Dan actually say this: 80% of the people who end up in a chamber followed the dive computer to the letter. 80%. Yeah, I mean, it goes to show, right? There's more to.
And actually, you know, linking with that situational awareness piece and the computers, and when we automate something, we stop paying attention to it. We trust it. You know, we even looking at automobiles and Teslas and, you know, hands-off capability. Well, we just trust it. It's automated, it's electronic, it's fine, until it's not. And now you have to go, what's going on? And, you know, the easy divers is what you can computer with, which is great as long as they've got potentially different algorithms or software in them, because otherwise you could potentially have the same sort of mode failure that's there. So fortunately, things are getting way more reliable than they used to be, but having that mindset that says, hang on a minute, my computer says I've got an hour's worth of decode and I did have 20 minutes. Why has it jumped 40 minutes worth of decode? Well, it must be correct. Or worse, hang on a minute, I did have an hour's worth, and it now says
it's only
20 minutes. What's going on? And I've had people who don't, incident reports where people have run out of gas because they're following their computer and it's stopped ticking over on the decode. They're just below the sort of 6 meter stop. And so the clock stops. And they sit there and go, oh, I did have like 10 minutes and I'm doing 30 minutes and I've just run out of gas. I can't bend my, you can fix bend, you can't round. But and you just look at this and go, why would you do that? But if you have no idea what the computer is doing and why it's behaving the way it is, and it's follow the computer, then do not be surprised that that's what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
And we shouldn't judge on that because you don't know it, and you don't know what you don't know.
No, well, true that. I mean, it's, again, I think we were talking a bit about a Facebook post a while back around human errors, and that a lot of people that just write off, oh, it's a human error, his fault, bye next, and it's not that, it's not supposed to be used as an excuse.
Well, that's what you were talking about with aviation 50 years ago, right? Pilot flew into terrain. Check, pilot error, good night, next.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that brings me to the next point, and I think, because I think the quote here is fantastic, and it's a quote from George Bernard Shaw. I mean, I'm sorry, George, I don't know who you are, but it's about communication, and I think it's fantastic. It says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Let that sink, I mean, it's perfect, because in diving, that's exactly what we see. It's really
interesting. Yeah. And so when I'm in classes and we're on sort of video for this, I put my hand up and say, what does that mean? And if you're tech or cave trained, you go stop. But if you're recreational, it's like 50 or 500. And so, having an understanding beforehand, and I'm not a fish diver, but
hammerhead. It's not 100 bar.
I didn't know what that was. And this,
So Gareth, do you know that little game you can play where
when you go diving with people who do fish and stuff?
Do you know that little game you can play with somebody where you tap out on a desk, right? I'll make it so you can see it if you're watching it on the video. It's like you tap out a song, right? And you ask somebody what the song is, right? And almost never, and to me, it's like super clear, right? Happy birthday to you. But if you're just listening to the taps, there's no way. And, we see this so much underwater. It's like, people are yelling at each other with hand signals. And I'm like, I have no freaking idea what you're talking about, but you look like you're a third base coach in baseball.
Yeah, totally. Exactly.
One of the bits that sort of get to people is the more stressed you are, the more you make an assumption what the other person knows. So when calm and there isn't a time pressure, it is easy to get a sentence out, or you just get the wet notes out and you write it. But you are making an assumption. To your point there, Jeff, is I have an assumption when I tap this out that you will know what I'm thinking when that's happening.
Right.
And I'm currently in Athens running some human factors classes where the class is being run probably about 50-50 Greek and English, which makes my understanding about what's going on interesting. But I can pick up in terms of the body language and the tone and the gestures what the general meaning is, because I've seen what those behaviors look like when there's language associated. So I can separate the words from the way that they're being said and they're being transmitted. And most of the time I get it right, but sometimes I don't. And you sit there going, oh, I made a real mess there because I misunderstood what was being said, because I've made some assumptions, and assumptions make the world go round at the pace they do.
You know, it's funny because, and then we'll get right back to what you're talking about, but I've taught a bunch of classes in languages I don't speak, and the most interesting, of course, is in the Asian languages, Chinese and Korean. But because I've taught the content so many times, I kind of know what the flow of the class is. I kind of know what people are talking about, but you're right, I don't have any specificity, right? I only have big picture, right? Are they going swimming now, or are they going to have dinner? So, you know, keeping this under, you know, this focus on communications and, you know, underwater, under stress, under frustration, there basically is no communication.
Yes,
so
totally.
Interesting. So another thing we all get to learn and pay attention to.
Yeah, exactly.
But only if you reflect. And I think that's the key bit there. And I don't think that's where we might end up going, but is the ability to look back, brief, and understand what happened in the past, so that you can look to say, what does the future look like?
Yeah, I think, and then when you looking at that, when you got experienced instructors, when we see those, and you can see the way that they're signaling or demonstrating certain skills, which is basically one big signal, right? One big communication. Look at me, I'm presenting a skill to you. And you can see, because of their experience, that within certain phases of that skill, they know this is a common error. And then they'll slow down at that point, or reiterate a certain, you know, aspect of that, and then continue with normal pace. And I think we should take, as a diver, that approach to our signals. The more complicated the message we want to deliver, the slower we need to deliver it, because we're not all thinking about a song that's called Happy Birthday to You when we're just hearing taps. And a way to get around it for you divers out there that think, okay, then how do we do this, is to just reply the hand signal with the same signal, and don't make everything and every dive an okay party. Because you'll see this, right? It's like, okay, you watch me switch. Okay. You watch me stand up an SMB. Okay. Let's go this way. Okay. How much gear you got? 100 bar. Okay. And it's like, no, he's not asking you if you're okay. He's telling you how much gas do you have. And he is supposed to be replied in the same way. I think if you just make that communication loop a feedback with the same signal, you catch a lot of miscommunication in water.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Let's talk about the instructors for a while. You want to, Ben? And integrating some of this, and what we do, and what the expectation is for our students, and you know, what Gareth has seen in the world of teaching scuba. You want to go down that road for a while?
Yeah, we can. I've written down a point here. I wanted to probe your image about the filters of the instructor's view towards the student. What I mean by that is that instructors have a ton of experience and a ton of past experiences that they bring with them, maybe without knowing that they bring it with them. And the filter through which they look at certain aspects might be different than the filter that the student looks at the same situation. And you see it sometimes at busy dive sites, right? A group of students assembling gear, you turn on something and you can hear it. Something's leaking. And you can see that the students are like, oh, it's leaking a little bit here. Is that normal? You know, and the instructor comes in, looks a bit at it, and you kind of see what he's thinking, like, oh, fuck, I don't have a spare. It's okay. It's just a small leak. It's no problem. It's a small bubbles, no troubles, you hear, you know? And I think this installs such a bad judgment, because the instructor might, I'm pretty sure the instructor is right, because his experience tells him that leak is insignificant. But how is the student expected to judge in the same way when another leak appears, and you think, okay, that's a little leak. The other little leak was not insignificant, so this little leak might also be insignificant, where all of a sudden that leak kills him. And I think this is where we as instructors really have to be careful to reset our baggage when we're dealing with new students. That's seeing
The
all
role
these things for the
modeling
first time.
Yeah, the role modeling is so important in this context, because we, as you know, evolved over thousands of years, that we take the visual cues more powerful than the verbal cues. So if we see somebody do a certain behavior, but they tell us something else, we will copy the role model, you know, the visual cues that are there. It's that bit of, you need to walk the talk. And there's a great quote from the ex-army, the Australian head of the head of the Australian Army, which was the lowest standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And that is incredibly powerful for instructors, because you can walk past something, and if you're unable to challenge it, and they know you're an instructor, you're a role model, and you go, okay, they've accepted that, that's okay. And that could be as simple as doing a pre-dive check. It's okay, the students can check themselves, and they'll do a buddy check, but who checks the instructor? Because actually, hey, when you get to be an instructor, you don't have to do a check, because you're good. And that's, you know, and it's this bit, no, hang on a minute, I'm fallible, I make mistakes, I want you to check my stuff to make sure that I haven't forgotten something. And, you know, you end up with an instructor jumping in without their fins on, and it's like, oh man. And you sit there going, actually, there's a great opportunity to say, you know what, I screwed up because I didn't do the buddy check. Not you didn't check me, it is me that takes responsibility for that.
We all have stories.
And that's really hard.
We all have stories, but I was walking into the water behind an instructor with a back zip dry suit wide open.
Yeah.
How do you cotton to that? Right? It's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to take your students in and drown? You know?
Oh yes. So, you know, that filter is definitely the recognition that you also know what is considered acceptable or not, and we have to put those baselines in. And next time, take from that event, make a note. Exactly. Yeah.
So I think it's on the training agencies to get at the front of this, and I feel like we've done a pretty good job at it. You know, I know that you know, we just completed an IDC in Italy with we have four new instructors who will be on the website early next week as we get their paperwork squared away. But you know, throughout that whole process of that particular IDC, where it rained in Italy, there had no visibility, the lake was quality water was bad, and they ended up in a pool and all this other stuff. I kept saying to the ITs, make sure you always remember it's a teaching class, not a diving class, right? And to me, that's the most important aspect of a lot of this, is that as we're teaching students, as we're teaching instructors, as we're teaching instructor trainers, to make sure that we're always keeping track of the fact that people have to think about these things, right? They have to think about how they're teaching, how they're demonstrating. We know that the law of primacy says the first thing you come in contact with is the thing that's going to stick forever. You know, I remember my first solo in an airplane, which was, I don't know, 1979 or something ridiculous like that. So, you know, you have to, it's on the agencies, and you know, I mean, we can blow our own horn and say, I think, you know, at UTD, I think we do a good job at this. It's on the agencies to say, you make the instructors who will then in turn make the students who understand, you know, don't, you know, quickly check off a checklist without thinking. Make sure that, you know, you go through a buddy check by thinking about it. Make sure that you have a plan. Make sure that you can recognize incidents before they turn into accidents. There's a million ways to look at this, but I really think it's on the agencies to get in front of this, not the individual instructors.
Yeah,
And
on that
I
note, also,
agree.
I'd like to say a lot of people also are quick to judge agencies. That's a ABC diver, or that's a so and so diver, and then we have to be careful that we don't put the blame on an entity that can't respond, and it's usually either the diver itself, because say what you want, most of the agencies out there have okay standards, have an
Hmm.
okay way of delivering the necessary content to
Hmm.
have a safe diver. If the quality control or the way of the conduction of the courses leave to be desired, I mean, that's a discussion for something else. But I think um, we need to take responsibility into our own hands. Like, okay, I am going to learn to dive as a diver, regardless of the agency I'm choosing. You have to do your own research and, like, okay, what can I expect? What is dangerous and what is safe, and a lot of people have a good grasp of what's supposed to be the right procedure for certain things. And we don't write off the liability by checklists or a book or an exam or a certain skill set or whatever. It's supposed to always relate back to the actual diving at
I-
hand, I think.
I'm not sure I fully agree with that, because I do think in diving training, there's a ton of what you don't know that the
Yeah.
instructors have to bring to the student. But the
Hmm.
other thing I was thinking about when you were saying that, where I do agree thoroughly, is that, why do I have instructor liability insurance, right? When somebody
Mm.
drowns, they don't sue the dead guy, right? They
No.
go back to the
Yeah,
instructor, right? And if
very good. I only got
somebody
to give a
drowns and
fine
they took a
actually.
class 5 years ago, they don't sue the dead guy. They sue the instructor who taught him 5 years ago,
Mm.
right? So,
Hmm.
I mean, we're in a society where we're stuck with this. If we want to teach diving now, we can't change it. I'm not going to tell all the
Yeah.
UTD instructors, oh, you don't need insurance because they should be suing the dead guy.
Mm.
We have to look up and step up and take the responsibility that society is ramming down our throats on this topic, and say, okay, it's our responsibility to teach people to think. It's not
Yeah.
our responsibility to teach people to dive. you know
No.
we'll get you
So
through the
it's an interesting
equipment,
bit.
we'll get
Yeah.
you through buoyancy, but we have got to teach you to think, or there's no point, because then we don't have a country or a world that sues the dead guy.
Mm.
So what I would look at that from a systems point of view is our behavior is a function of our personality and the person in the environment. And I do a lot of work in high risk industries: construction, power generation, rail work, healthcare, all sorts of stuff. And we there are a number of principles that we're looking at. And one of those is context drives behaviors. So if you reward lots of good behavior and quantity, but you don't look at quality, people will go towards quantity over quality, because that's what we're rewarding. Conversely, if we punish people for the mistakes they make, what happens is nobody talks about the mistakes they make. They don't talk about the little things. So in terms of aviation, what they've done is they put processes in place, and in some countries you have legal protection that says if you file a safety report to, say, the
Yeah,
aviation safety reporting system,
yeah.
as long as it's done within 7 days or whatever the time limit is, it cannot be used as disciplinary action. And the same thing happens, and I think 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there were 2 major accidents in the UK, and the Air Accident Investigation Branch were asked to release information for litigation against the pilots. And the AIB said, no, we are not releasing the cockpit video that was there and the cockpit voice recorded video, the audio that was there, because it will prejudice future learning. And there was a huge, very high level decision that said, actually, if we want to be able to learn from the near misses that happen all the time, we have to make sure that people are able to talk about those things free from fear of litigation, because most people are not doing it through recklessness. Yeah, there is a very small percentage of people who are out there who care not what will happen, but they are very few and far between. And as the other part of the system piece is creating the culture and the environment where you sort of touched on earlier, Ben, is you see stuff online, and how do you ask that curious question, or you pose that curious, you send that curious email to say, have you thought about what the potential implications would be? Or if you're on a boat and you see somebody's equipment configuration and you look at that and go, oh, shit, that's just a disaster waiting to happen. How do I go to that person on the other side of the boat and say, I've seen that and I'm not sure. Can you explain the rationale behind that? Because from my experience, that doesn't look right. And we've got to create an environment that when somebody does that, you go, cool, thanks, I'd missed that. As opposed to what normally happens is, who the hell are you to tell me how my kit is configured? And it's not just the agency, it's the community. It's about understanding our fallibility, that we can look out for each other rather than I'm right, you're wrong, sort your stuff out.
Exactly. It's delicate, right? Because what you see happen is that people, they judge just a normal configuration, and because they just don't agree with that configuration, and it doesn't fit into their way of diving, they judge it to be unsafe and then hack on that diver and then think that's wrong. We need to it's something more base connected, that okay, you see people pointing fingers, and we shouldn't point fingers. I always say to people, it's about a choice. You chose to dive, and now you choose how you want to dive. If you want to choose a DIR fashion, great. I believe in that fashion. I believe in that philosophy. That's our whole organization is based around that. Perfect. If you don't believe it, perfect. Go and have your fun dive. But I do agree in stopping certain unsafe scenarios. And a good example is that seeing someone walk into the water where the tank band that's holding the cylinder on the BC or wing is at an angle. And that's a clear sign that as soon as that tank gets lighter in the water, it's going to get loose and potentially lose. And that's where I think you have the obligation to jump in and say, hey, excuse me, can I just tighten up your tank band for you because it looks like it's a little bit loose, instead of judging. And it's like, hey, what's your light canister doing on the left hand side? It should be on the right hand side. Come on. You can choose.
I will say that the guy who had the open back zip dry suit was pretty freaking grateful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So there you go.
So how was it, Jeff, when you walked in with that dry suit then?
Yeah. Well, how was it?
What are you talking about?
Cold.
Oh, yeah. Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. No, I think it's about a humble approach to how about other people approach their diving is something that we need to work on as an industry also, because it's like you said, Gareth, it's a lot of fingers pointing, and especially online when you have the comfort of your own home behind a screen, tempers, they get high, and I think it's a shame, because it kind of puts people off the fact that to change their idea and to address certain issues. But you just ask a question. If you see something that you think is dangerous, or you are unsure about how this person will respond, then ask how they would react in the scenario that you expect to go wrong. Like if you see an alternate air source, regardless of the configuration, that's just stuffed in a very funny way, ask them how do you handle gas sharing underwater, and then they will show you, and then they'll realize themselves, oh, wait a minute, it's stuck on here. But I'll then just do this. They probably didn't even realize that you noticed it was stuck, but you know,
Yeah.
between the lines now it's got fixed. And I think it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's all about that little bit more subtle approach, instead of walking around with a teacher stick in your hand and go beating everyone on the dive site around.
Yeah.
So
Good. Well, I think that's a good place to sort of
Totally.
wrap this up a little bit. It's been a really, really interesting talk, and hopefully, you know, we didn't set out today to, you know, offer anything or ask for anything other than some information and put up a couple of opinions, and, you know, sort of bring this, you know, to our listening group about, you know, the fact that, you know, somebody's actually working on the stuff that, you know, we think we've been doing well since we started, you know, 12 years ago, and hopefully we are, and hopefully others will pick it up. So for the book, Under Pressure by Gareth Lock, and the website is what?
thehumandiver.com. And if I can, what I'd really like is if you go to thehumandiver.com/if only, which was the documentary that I published in May this year, working with Ashley Buggy, who's the widow, and to tell the story of a tragic accident of a rebreather diver who got in the water without their oxygen cylinder turned on. And that's one of those, in hindsight, how could you be so stupid, you know? And the story is about telling, the documentary is about telling the story about how it made sense for Brian to do what he did, and why it was so difficult for the rest of the dive team on the boat to go, that's not right, but they were unable to speak up because there were a whole bunch of other social pressures that prevented them from doing so. And the sort of feedback that both Ashley and I have had has been that, again, has changed our outlook on how to speak up, and the value of checklists, the value of teamwork, the value of ensuring that the instructors that we get for our training are who they say they are and provide the skills that they should do. So I would, you know, recommend, if you haven't seen it, to go and watch If Only as a documentary.
Yeah, I've seen it. I think it highlights a lot of the things that I think is changing in the industry, to be honest. I mean, I've been in the diving industry myself for over 20 years, and I think it's heading in the right direction, because we used to have this like more clouded view of what was a good course, right? Because we didn't have the internet, and it was harder to judge what was good quality teachings. And it used to be only that, hey, the instructor was a nice guy and we had fun on our course, it must have been a good course.
Yeah.
And now we are, with this whole thing going on, and the things you're putting out there, I think it's becoming easier to see through the mess, to put it politely.
No, definitely.
All right, so thank you everybody for this. We really appreciate it. Find us wherever you find your podcast, of course. And if you are so inclined, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. That's the place that seems to make the most impact. And we will look back and catch you on the next episode. So thanks, Gareth.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rich, Ben.
Thank you, Gareth, for tuning in, and everyone, get a hold of your copy. I mean, it's a must read. Really good fun.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.